It's no joke getting locked up for something you haven't done. The worst thing about it for me was not being able to see my kids, not being around when they were growing up. The only thing they had of me was this one guy kept picking me out, saying I was the one he saw, I was the one who'd done it.
Juries tend to put a lot of weight to eyewitness testimony, even though academics and even police experiences, it can be variable.
Eyewitness testimony can be a good source of information, but it can also lead us seriously astray.
And over the years, there's certainly been dozens or even hundreds of cases in which innocent people have been convicted and sent to prison on the basis of eyewitness testimony.
An example of that is a recent series of cases in America where 40 cases of rape were investigated, and the most prominent evidence that secured a conviction was actually eyewitness testimony. But subsequent DNA evidence showed that, in fact, the person who was convicted couldn't possibly have committed the crime.
Well, it only takes one. Once a witness IDs you, that's it, basically. You know you're going down.
Eyewitness testimony is the evidence given by people who've actually seen something happen. And in court, it's often the most important piece of evidence there is. Even in cases where there's no evidence other than eyewitness testimony, three-quarters still result in a conviction. But how good are we at remembering things accurately? Would most of us make good witnesses? Imagine you're in the car park.
How's it going? I'm just coming to college to do some work. I'm going to go and sit in the library for a bit. Study
Most crimes like this are over in seconds. So how much are most people able to recall accurately? To explore this, we showed a video of the mugging to groups of students and asked them to imagine they were in the car park at the time. Later, they were interviewed. What did they remember?
I didn't see much of his face. He was wearing a black woolly hat, pulled down, so it covered most of his face around here, but I couldn't see his face. He was white.
He was a white person. He had a black hat. He was dressed in all black.
I think it was jeans, trainers, a black fleecy jacket.
He was wearing a black coat. He looked quite tall, and he had a handbag.
Yeah, there were two girls chatting with each other. Then a boy just came out from nowhere, tall, wearing a black jacket.
He was tall, fair, and he was wearing a black coat. He was tall.
5'4",
got my build, a bit lanky.
5'6". He was wearing a woolly hat. He was a dark coloured woolly hat. He had stubble on his face.
Quite dark eyebrows. And, quite dark eyes as well, I reckon.
We like to think that we can remember faces very well, and that's usually because we're quite familiar with certain people and we can recognise them quite easily. Unfortunately, there seem to be quite different cognitive abilities involved in facial recognition and facial recall. So if you ask someone to verbally describe a face, they'll have quite serious difficulty in doing that. And that's exactly what the police asked them to do.
He had a long face.
The chubbyish face.
I think he was wearing balaclava over his face.
He had blonde hair. Actually, he had a woolly hat as well, but I think he had blonde hair underneath.
And bald blonde hair.
I think it was brown.
He was tall. He was slim, and he had black hair. He had kind of gingerish coloured hair.
What then happens is that rather vague description can lead to a series of errors. So if someone relies on that description, then identifies a photo, then identifies someone in an identification parade, that can lead to a misperception of accuracy in recall, which actually can lead to lots of problems.
Identity parades are helpful. Again, a court will give a lot of weight to the evidence presented if you can say that this defendant has stood on an identity parade and has been identified.
Once they've picked you out, they feel like they've got to stick to it. You know, it's like they can't back down or something, so they get up in court and they say, yeah, that's him. I saw him do it. But often they're quite confused.
And how old do you think he was?
Between 18 to 20. Like 20s, about 30.
About 17, 18.
30.
18, I think. 18, 19.
So, if there are problems remembering the criminal, what about the incident itself? A few of our witnesses were very accurate.
What I saw was a female being mugged by quite a tall man. He was wearing a woolly hat. I think it was a grey woolly hat, and a 3/4-inch jacket. Dark colour, I think it was grey.
The black girl was going into her glove compartment, I think, and another girl came over and started talking to her. She had a bag on her left shoulder.
One was black, she was actually talking to the girl who got mugged. The one who was facing the car, the one who actually got mugged, she was wearing a black duffel coat and a purple roll neck top. She had dark coloured hair to her shoulders.
But they were the exception, not the rule.
It was a shoulder bag. It was quite big. It was black and green. It was quite a small bag and it was black.
Yeah, it was like a satchel, a brown satchel, smallish and black.
So why are we getting so many differences in these accounts of the criminal and the crime? What have psychologists told us about memory generally that might help explain these variations?
My earliest memory is probably play school, going to a big hall with all of the little kids that I didn't know.
My earliest memories, I think, starting school. I remember I cried, but then I really enjoyed it. And it didn't bother me then, being away from my mum and dad. I really wanted to go all the time. The first day I started school, I didn't like that at all. Because that was like the first time I've been away from my mum and everything. And then I started to get used to it. And then I used to get involved with the things. I used to like that.
So how do we remember? And what is memory anyway?
If I knew the answer to that, then I would be a world-famous professor. Roughly speaking, memory is the capacity that we share with a lot of other species for remembering things that have happened in the past. And one of the principal functions of memory is to use our recollections of things that have happened in the past in order to be able to plan our future behaviour more appropriately.
When you say what is memory, you're implying that there is a thing that we've got that is a memory. What we do is actually seem to remember material. That is a process. Whereas the thing, memory, perhaps we don't have.
There are many ways in which we remember information, but what I think is particularly important is what we normally try to do is we try and relate new information to the information and knowledge that we already possess.
The common sense view of memory is that it's rather like a mental filing cabinet. We store things away and retrieve them when we want them. But psychologists have shown that it's just not that simple.
The ways in which we remember events tend to be very largely based upon what is known as schemas. That is to say, we have sort of complex knowledge structures about most of the things that we encounter in our everyday lives, and we make a lot of use of these in trying to remember information. So a classic example in psychology is you present someone with a story about what happens in a restaurant, they relate that to their restaurant schema, if you like, and the reason that we know that that is happening is that afterwards, if you ask people to recall the information, they will often recall events that you would expect to see happen in a restaurant, like asking for the bill and paying the bill and so on, even if those events were not in the story they've been asked to recall. So these general knowledge structures or schemas play a crucial role in our learning and remembering.
Our memories are not permanent and fixed. They have to be re-remembered each time. And often we use our present knowledge to rewrite what we recall. Psychologists refer to this process as constructive memory.
Well, constructive memory is memory that involves sort of taking account not only of the information that you've been presented with or asked to learn, but is also kind of a construction that involves making use of previous relevant information and knowledge that you've got.
If somebody tells us a story and we can't remember all of it, we tend to fill in the gaps in the story in ways which make it coherent. And that's what constructive memory is about. It's the fact that if we don't remember things exactly, and typically we don't, then we try to tell a coherent story about what happened.
It's a better description of how we remember things in that memory is probably more to do with imagination than it has to do with straight recall. So you're reinventing an event to recall it. This is why you sometimes make mistakes with it. You turn it into a better story in your mind. Sometimes when you actually experience an event, you can almost be making up a story to tell your mates later. So constructive memory is kind of turning your life into a story, I suppose.
Memories are reconstructions of events, and so they're subject to distortion and contamination. And unfortunately, that doesn't mean to say that people are less confident about their recall of events. It's just that they actually may be recalling false information.
Our robber was alone, yet some of our witnesses reconstructed a memory of him with an accomplice. Was there anyone else in the car park?
Yes. I think I remember the thief. He was speaking to someone before he actually ran and stole the bag. And when he ran off with the bag, someone else came and tried to grab him. See.
The fact he was speaking to someone, do you think there might have been more than one person involved?
Yes, definitely. I think it was planned.
It was in the car park, and there were these two girls chatting there, and all of a sudden this boy, they were there, these two boys were there, and one of them came, took the bag of one of the girls, and ran.
So there were two boys chatting and one of them?
Yeah, one of them.
Right, so you think there might have been more than one person involved in that?
Yeah, could be.
The guy who actually snatched the bag had a friend with him as well.
So you think they were working together?
Possibly, maybe, yeah, it would be.
What colour were they?
I think one was white and one was black. Yeah.
The idea of memories as constructions has important implications for eyewitness testimony. Psychological research has shown that people's reconstruction of events can be influenced by the question that's asked.
One of the major points of error within an interview is if the interviewer uses leading questions. And if they suggest things too authoritatively, then the interviewee may well take that on board as it had happened because they themselves can't remember accurately, and then that will be incorporated into their memory trace of the event. The work of Elizabeth Loftus has demonstrated very, very well how even the most subtle change in the wording of a question can influence the way that people will recall what they saw.
One well-known study by Elizabeth Loftus involved presenting a scene with a car accident and so on, and afterwards the participants were either asked, did you see a broken headlight or did you see the broken headlight? Now that difference in the question may seem very, very small, but of course if you ask, did you see the broken headlight, it strongly implies that there was a broken headlight. In fact, there wasn't, but the participants were much more likely to say, yes, there was a broken headlight when they were asked the leading question, did you see the broken headlight? But what we store in long-term memory is not something like a photograph or a video recording of an event. It's much more sort of fragile and much more easily changed than that would suggest. And so if you ask a leading question after someone has witnessed an event, this can systematically change the way in which people remember the event.
We tried this ourselves with our student groups. When we simply asked what happened, none of our witnesses mentioned any violence.
The man came across who was wearing a black woolly hat and a long black coat. He ran up to him and just rubbed the bag off the woman and tried to make a run for it. One of the men who was at the other side tried to stop the man, but he couldn't, and he got away with the bag.
Well, there was a lady getting into her car, and one of her friends, it looked like, came up to her and started talking to her. And about halfway through the conversation, a man came running up to the friend and grabbed her handbag and ran away.
However, when we asked another group how much violence was used, the replies were rather different. How much violence did the mugger use?
A bit, because he had to struggle to pull it away from him a bit. So
he was quite aggressive?
Yeah.
How much violence did the mugger use?
Quite a bit. He just went up to the woman and grabbed the bag, pushed a bit, and just ran. I think he just pulled and tugged it out really and shoved through everyone.
So if our recall can be altered by the nature of the question, is it possible that we could be made to remember things that weren't there at all?
If false information is put into questions, as long as that false information could potentially have been true, in other words, if it's not glaringly obvious that it's false, then the interviewee may well be misled into thinking that that must be the case.
It's as if we have a natural tendency to integrate the information that we've got. So if a student is studying a topic in psychology, they store the information away in long-term memory, but if they then read or hear about some additional information, they integrate the new information with the old. And of course that's a very, very sensible and useful strategy. However, in some of the research on eyewitness testimony, if you provide inaccurate or misleading information, people go through the normal strategy of integrating the new information with the old, but if the new information is wrong, well, of course, then it's not going to work, and that's going to cause memory to be a lot less accurate than it otherwise would be.
Again, we tried this with our witnesses. There was nothing to show our robber was armed, and when simply asked to describe the incident, none of the students mentioned a weapon. However, we then asked another group of students if they could describe the weapon the robber was carrying. You know the attacker, he was carrying something in his hand, some sort of weapon. Can you describe it, what it was?
Looked like a knife.
I didn't see a knife.
It's quite a big knife.
I didn't see it.
You didn't think he was carrying a weapon?
I'm not sure. I think it was quite short, possibly a flip knife, but because he wanted something smaller sufficient for a quick attack, possibly.
A third of our sample described a knife, and others simply said they didn't see a weapon. Interestingly, none of them contradicted us and said, no, he wasn't carrying a weapon.
There may very well be a desire to please the experimenter. Again, not necessarily conscious, but if somebody says, what speed was the car travelling when it smashed into the tree, one doesn't want to say, well, actually it didn't smash into the tree at all. It simply bumped into the tree because it wasn't going very fast. If you make a response of that kind, then you are, of course, in conflict with the experimenter. And by and large, people don't want to do that because experimenters are often seen as being in a position of authority.
So given its tremendous importance to the criminal justice system, what have psychologists suggested to improve the reliability of eyewitness testimony?
It's not about avert your eyes if you're looking at something you shouldn't be.
Our memories are interconnected. Some things can be used as cues to remind us of other things. Teachers often use this technique to try to trigger students' memories.
There's a whole host of symptoms we should be well aware of. You've all got fear of something, surely.
But can this technique be used to jog an eyewitness's memory?
One of the ways in which police forces try and get hold of eyewitnesses and try and find out what has been happening in criminal events is via reconstructions of events, and Crime Watch is a notable example of a television programme in which exactly that is done. The basic idea here is that you try and provide the viewer with as many sort of clues and cues of the actual event that had happened, so as to maximise the chances that any viewers who had observed part or all of the event in question, that this will serve to trigger off their memory.
Police reconstructions are used and they can be very helpful in terms of jogging people's memories. The difficulty is they have to be absolutely accurate, and obviously there may not be accuracy over every single detail. The difficulty, therefore, is that if there are unintentional inaccuracies of detail introduced into the reconstruction, that may be perceived by people as real, and that might therefore create false recall of events that they may have witnessed and not attached much significance to.
So could the answer lie here? Can witnesses be hypnotised into remembering?
Now, when you use hypnosis to try and increase what eyewitnesses can remember, there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is that eyewitnesses do recall more of the relevant information relating to whatever incident or event it was. But the bad news is that under hypnosis, most people become less critical in terms of what they recall.
If hypnosis was used to improve the memory of eyewitnesses, the danger is that the police and criminal justice officials will probably regard their testimony as rather more valid than it probably is. The other difficulty is that when people are put into a hypnotic state, they actually become more suggestible and more compliant. So in fact, the reliability of their recall may be worse.
There was two men, one of them was white, one was black.
The kind of proof positive that this happens was there was a study years ago when people under hypnosis were asked to recall events from the future, and most of them quite confidently started describing what was going to happen in the future. Okay, so hypnosis is a dangerous technique.
And walked out with laptops.
So if police reconstructions and hypnosis are of limited value, could the interview itself be changed to provide more accurate information? Recently, psychologists have developed a new cognitive style of interview.
This cognitive approach is based on the notion that what people remember from an event, they remember all kinds of things relating to that event, not only the obvious aspects such as the individual's concern and the weapon used and so on, but also the information that's stored in memory is much broader than that and includes even such things as the mood state the individual was in at the time and so on.
What it endeavours to do is to enable interviewees to review and re-experience the events that they witnessed without any interference from leading questions.
The best way of describing this is to say, first of all, you'll always start off with open questions. Tell me what happened. Tell me what you saw. Tell me what you heard. If it's relevant, tell me what you smelt. If it's relevant, tell me what you tasted, particularly with sex offences, to try to obtain detail.
The aim is to provide some triggers so that the number of retrieval routes are widened. So some of those strategies might be to ask the interviewee to recall the event from a variety of different perspectives, i.e. not just from their own perspective, but from someone standing at the opposite end of the street or someone behind the counter rather than in front of it.
So in our robbery, witnesses wouldn't just be asked, "What did you see?" They might also be asked to describe events from the perspective of the victim and her friend, or perhaps from the point of view of the other two men in the car park.
And this more cognitive approach has the real advantage that by and large it seems to increase the information that can be remembered, but without producing a significant increase in the number of errors and mistaken pieces of information that are recalled.
It's very successful, and in fact it's the sort of technique that is now taught to police officers routinely. But interestingly, it isn't just police officers who can benefit. There are various studies which show that psychology students can also manage to extract twice as much information using the cognitive interview than using the standard interview technique.
The cognitive interview might produce better recall, but there are still problems. Problems arising from the fundamentally fragile and imaginative nature of memory.
The problem with that has been found, though, that in fact, even by asking questions as neutral and as open as, consider the head, what can you see? An eyewitness can want to be very helpful, and in fact, they can even begin to be creative and start to give you detail that actually wasn't present at the scene because they want to be helpful.
Yeah, well, you're standing there in court and you're looking at this guy saying a load of stuff that you haven't done. You know it's not true. Telling the jury things about you, and you can see him looking at him thinking, yeah, I believe that, I believe him. You know, why is he going to lie? And he's not lying. That's the thing. He's just got it wrong. But you're the one that's going to have to pay for it.
Psychological studies of memory have shown that the gap between reality and imagination, between what we see and what we think we see, is much closer than most of us realise. As far as the legal system is concerned, psychological research has suggested that as long as we continue to convict people on the basis of eyewitness testimony alone, then there'll be many more miscarriages of justice.
Well, once you've been locked up for something you haven't done, that's 5 years of your life wasted. 5 years, you're not going to get it back.